Imagine for a second that you are 19 years old. You are standing in the office of a terrifyingly intelligent professor at Stanford University. You have a full scholarship. You have a bright future. Your parents have high expectations. But you are standing there, trembling slightly, holding a check in your hand. It is the tuition money your parents saved for your education. And you are about to tell this professor that you are dropping out. You aren't leaving to party. You aren't leaving to travel Europe. You are leaving because you believe with every fiber of your being that you have found the holy grail of medicine. You look that professor in the eye and tell him that the way we draw blood is barbaric. The needles, the vials, the pain. You tell him you can change it all. You can diagnose cancer, diabetes, and hundreds of diseases from a single drop of blood drawn from a fingertip. No more needles, no more waiting. Instant knowledge, instant power. The professor tells you it is impossible. Physics doesn't work that way. Chemistry doesn't work that way, but you don't listen. You don't care about physics, you care about the vision, you take that tuition money, you walk out of that office, and you start a company. That decision would eventually make you the youngest self-made female billionaire in history. It would put you on the covers of Fortune, Forbes, and Inc. It would get you meetings with presidents. It would make you a star, and then it would destroy everything. This is the story of Elizabeth Holmes. To understand the magnitude of this story, we have to look at the numbers because they are staggering. At her peak, Elizabeth Holmes had a net worth of $4.5 billion. That is $4,500 million. She didn't inherit it. She didn't marry into it. She built it on paper, selling a dream that was so intoxicating that the smartest men in the world lined up to give her their money. Rupert Murdoch gave her $125 million. The Walton family, the founders of Walmart, gave her $150 million. Betsy DeVos gave her $100 million. These are people who do not lose money. These are people who have armies of lawyers and financial advisors. And yet, this young woman, with her unblinking blue eyes and her strange, deep baritone voice, convinced them all to hand over their fortunes without ever showing them how her technology actually worked. That is a level of persuasion that borders on hypnosis. But to understand the fall, we have to go back to the beginning, to the ordinary start that birthed this extraordinary deception. Elizabeth wasn't a poor kid from the streets. She came from a lineage of greatness. Her great-great-grandfather founded the Fleischmann's Yeast Company. She grew up hearing stories of innovation and empire. But the family fortune had dwindled over generations. The pressure was there. The expectation was there. She needed to be great. She didn't just want to be rich. She wanted to be important. She wanted to be historical. She idolized Steve Jobs. She didn't just admire him. She wanted to be him. She started wearing black turtlenecks. She adopted a uniform. She drank green juices. She slept 4 hours a night. She was crafting a persona before she even had a product. This is a crucial lesson in personal branding taken to a toxic extreme. She understood that people don't invest in products, they invest in stories. And she was writing the greatest story in Silicon Valley. When she dropped out of Stanford in 2003 to start Theranos, a combination of the words therapy and diagnosis, she had a patent application and a lot of ambition, but she had zero engineering experience. She hired people, she rented space, and she started pushing her team to build the impossible. The device was supposed to be a small box, the size of a desktop computer, that could run hundreds of tests on a few drops of blood. She called it the Edison. It sounded perfect, it sounded revolutionary, but there was one massive problem that Elizabeth refused to acknowledge. It didn't work. The science wasn't there. When you prick a finger, the blood cells break. The sample is contaminated with tissue fluids. It is tiny. Trying to run 200 tests on a microscopic drop of exploded blood cells is like trying to reconstruct a symphony from a single distorted note. Her engineers told her this. They told her it was physically impossible with current technology. And this is where the story shifts from a struggling entrepreneur to something darker. Most founders, when faced with a physics problem, pivot. They change the idea, they compromise. Elizabeth Holmes did not compromise. She doubled down. She fired the engineers who told her no. She hired new ones who were willing to try. She created a culture of fear and absolute secrecy. She made everyone sign intense non-disclosure agreements. Departments weren't allowed to talk to each other. The chemistry team couldn't talk to the engineering team. She isolated everyone so that she was the only one who saw the full picture. And the picture was a disaster. The Edison machines were overheating. They were shattering blood vials. They were giving results that were wildly inaccurate. A test might say you had syphilis when you didn't. It might say your potassium was fine when you were about to have a heart attack. But outside the walls of Theranos, the legend was growing. Elizabeth was a master of the reality distortion field, a term used to describe Steve Jobs' ability to convince people of anything. She began courting powerful board members. She didn't go after medical experts. She went after old, powerful men with reputations to protect. George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, General James Mattis. These men knew nothing about blood science, but they knew charisma. They saw a young, brilliant woman who wanted to save the world, and they fell in love with the image. Having these titans on her board gave her instant credibility. If Henry Kissinger trusts her, surely the technology must be real, right? This was her shield. No one questioned the tech because they were too busy admiring the board of directors. By 2013, Theranos was ready to come out of the shadows. Elizabeth struck a deal with Walgreens. This was the turning point that would lead to her doom, though she saw it as her greatest triumph. She convinced Walgreens to put Theranos wellness centers in their drugstores. Real patients would come in, real blood would be drawn, real medical decisions would be made based on her tests. This wasn't a research project anymore. This was people's lives, and the machine still didn't work. So what did she do? She cheated. She and her inner circle, led by her secret boyfriend and COO, Sunny Balwani, hacked the Siemens machines. They bought standard commercial blood analyzers, the big machines that every other lab used, and they hid them in the back room. When a patient came in and gave a drop of blood, often they were told, "Oh, we actually need a venous draw today," and they would take a full vial. Or they would take the fingerstick sample, dilute it to make it bigger, and run it on the Siemens machines. They were running a fake lab. They were pretending to use their revolutionary technology, but in reality, they were just a disorganized standard lab using diluted samples that gave terrible results. But the world didn't know. The money kept pouring in. The valuation hit $9 billion. Elizabeth was everywhere. She was on stage with Bill Clinton. She was being interviewed by Charlie Rose. She was the face of the future. She had security guards around her at all times. She flew private. She had assistants managing her every minute. She lived in a bubble of adoration. She truly believed that if she just kept the money coming, eventually the technology would catch up. She was faking it until she made it. But in medicine, you cannot fake it. If you fake an app, the app crashes. If you fake a blood test, someone dies. The cracks started to appear from the inside. The turnover rate at Theranos was huge. Smart young graduates would join, fueled by the mission to change the world, and within weeks they would see the lies. They saw the Siemens machines hiding in the lab. They saw the data being manipulated. They saw the quality control tests being deleted. One of these young employees was Tyler Shultz. He was the grandson of George Shultz, the board member. Tyler was fresh out of Stanford. He idolized Elizabeth, but when he started working in the lab, he realized the tests were failing. He tried to tell Elizabeth. She ignored him. He tried to tell his grandfather. George Shultz didn't believe him. He trusted Elizabeth more than his own grandson. Tyler was crushed, but he was brave. He contacted the state regulators anonymously. At the same time, a reporter named John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal got a tip. He was a skeptical, seasoned investigative journalist. He heard a rumor that the Theranos technology was a sham. He started digging. He interviewed ex-employees. He talked to doctors who said the results made no sense. He talked to patients who had been given false scares. The more he dug, the more he realized this wasn't just a failure. It was a massive, coordinated fraud. Elizabeth found out about the investigation. She went into attack mode. She used her high-powered lawyer, David Boies, to threaten the sources. They had private investigators follow former employees. They threatened to bankrupt anyone who spoke. It was a war. But Carreyrou didn't stop. In October 2015, the article dropped. Hot startup Theranos has struggled with its blood test technology. It was a bombshell. The article revealed that the Edison machine was barely used and that the company was running tests on traditional equipment. Elizabeth went on television. She went on CNBC's Mad Money with Jim Cramer. She looked into the camera, blinking that slow, deliberate blink, and said, This is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world. She was quoting Gandhi. She was defiant. She denied everything. But the spell was broken. The regulators descended. The FDA showed up. The CMS, which regulates labs, showed up. They inspected the lab and found it was a hazard to patient health. They banned Elizabeth from running a blood lab for 2 years. Walgreens pulled out and sued. The investors who had been so charmed started asking for their money back. The valuation plummeted from $9 billion to zero. It happened fast. The lawsuits piled up. The Department of Justice opened a criminal investigation. Elizabeth Holmes, the Golden Girl, the next Steve Jobs, was indicted on federal fraud charges. The trial was a spectacle. We learned about the text messages between her and Sonny. We learned about the lifestyle. We learned about the deception. She took the stand in her own defense. She dropped the deep voice slightly. She played the victim. She claimed she was manipulated by Sonny. She claimed she didn't know the technical details. She tried to charm the jury just like she charmed the investors. But the evidence was overwhelming. The emails, the forged documents where she put Pfizer's logo on her own reports to impress investors. It was all there. She was found guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors. The sentence came down. Over 11 years in federal prison. The woman who wanted to be a billionaire icon is now inmate number 24,965-111. She is serving her time at a prison camp in Texas. She is a mother now, having had 2 children during the legal battles, leaving them behind as she serves her time. So, what is the lesson here for us? What can we learn from this tragedy? First, we have to admire the sheer audacity of her ambition. She dreamed bigger than anyone else. She convinced the world to believe in her. There is a power in storytelling that we cannot ignore. If you want to build wealth, you must learn to tell a compelling story. You must learn to make people believe in your vision. Elizabeth Holmes was a genius at this. She understood that people act on emotion, not logic. She sold hope. She sold a future where no one had to say goodbye to a loved one too soon because a disease was caught too late. That is a powerful hook. However, the second lesson is the most critical. The truth always wins. You cannot build a castle on a foundation of sand. Fake it till you make it works for confidence. It works for learning a new skill. It does not work for your core product. It does not work for integrity. You can have the best marketing in the world, the best connections, the most money, but if your product does not deliver, you will eventually collapse. Due diligence is boring, but it saves lives and fortunes. The investors lost hundreds of millions because they didn't ask to see the machine work. They were blinded by the fear of missing out. They were blinded by the celebrity. Elizabeth Holmes started with an ordinary desire to be significant, to be wealthy, to be remembered, and she achieved all of that. She will be remembered forever, but not as the hero she wanted to be. She will be remembered as a warning that charisma without character is dangerous, a warning that shortcuts lead to dead ends. She had the work ethic. She had the intelligence. She had the start. If she had just admitted failure, if she had pivoted, if she had been honest, she might have built something real. She might have failed, but she would have been free. Instead, she chose the lie, and the lie cost her everything. There is a moment in the documentary about her where a former employee says she never blinked. It's a metaphor for her entire career. She stared down reality and refused to blink. She refused to accept the limits of nature. And in the end, reality won. Reality always wins. For you listening to this, the path to extraordinary wealth is not about tricking the world. It is about solving real problems with real solutions. It is about value. It is about patience. You can replicate her persuasion. You can replicate her dedication. You can replicate her ability to build a network, but do not replicate her ethics, because the higher you fly on wings of wax, the harder you fall when the sun comes out. Elizabeth Holmes is proof that you can fool some of the people all of the time, and all of the people some of the time, but you cannot fool the market forever. Her story leaves us with a chilling question. How many other Theranos-like companies are out there right now, operating in stealth, fueled by hype and venture capital, waiting for their own inevitable crash? And are you smart enough to spot them? Or would you have invested in the girl with the black turtleneck and the unblinking stare? The line between a visionary and a fraud is often razor thin. It is defined by one thing: the truth. Stay on the right side of it and your success will be solid. Cross it and you might end up with billions for a moment, but you will lose your soul in the process. This was the story of Elizabeth Holmes. an ordinary student who became a billionaire on a lie. If you want to know how legitimate women built empires from scratch, women like Sarah Blakely, who started with $5,000 and 0 lies, make sure you subscribe. Because next, we are going to talk about a woman who was too poor to buy diapers and is now one of the richest women in America. You don't want to miss that.